So now we are at Vajra statement 26 of chapter 1. The last few statements, we are looking at how the understanding of emptiness and our understanding of cause and effect, all the way from just, an intellectual understanding, all the way to actual realization of emptiness. At all points, it should be clear, we should understand that emptiness in no way cancels out the workings of cause and effect. Even if you can say, well, there are these statements, these quotations that seems to say that, in fact, if you carefully consider this, you will see that this cannot be the case. I pointed out that this is particularly a burden, so to say, or more likely you're going to see this problem because of the nature of the material that we're dealing with, meaning that we're dealing with a traditional Buddhist practice that includes material from the Vajrayana, and then even in the Mahayana, the way these material, the sutras and tantras, and especially story of the Mahasiddhas, the way that they are told can often give this impression that there's what we call crazy wisdom, people acting outrageously as a way of demonstrating that they have gone beyond all concepts. Yeah, so this idea of going beyond all concepts is very attractive. So in the history, recent history of the transmission of Buddhism to the West, to some degrees, you can see there's that kind of attraction of transcending all concepts and therefore, right, behaving outrageously. So you have the stories of people and their involvement with Tibetan Buddhism and then behaving outrageously and calling that wisdom or crazy wisdom. Then I'm reminded of one, because the time period is the same. So, so this is in the early experience of one even Chinese Buddhist teacher and group that was active in San Francisco and attracting Western students. So this particular teacher have these students who, again, having read so much of these, even in Zen stories, of outrageous behavior. But this particular teacher, he emphasizes a lot on the importance of observing the Vinaya rules and to behave in accord with the Vinaya rules, even more so than general Chinese Buddhist practice, which can be kind of not pay that much attention to Vinaya rules except for the main rules, as long as you keep a few of the key rules, then it's considered fine. But this teacher himself is known for actually emphasizing the importance of keeping not just to the spirit, but to the letter of monastic deportment, monastic conduct. So one of his students one day, during the context of like lunch, was acting kind of outrageously. But the lunch meal in this monastery was done in a very organized way. So then when this student said, started to act outrageously and say it doesn't matter, then the master said, like, it will stop to matter how you act when it does not matter to you whether you are served tofu or turd for your lunch. Turd, Spanish is caca. It says, if it no longer matters whether this piece in front of you is tofu or turd, then you can come and tell me it does not matter. But as long as these concepts are relevant, he says, then conduct is relevant. And his point is like, no, even for Buddhists, it matters whether it's tofu or turd. Even Buddha Shakyamuni. There are stories where they go begging and did not get food. You don't see Buddha Shakyamuni eating, feces, because it's not possible. Stories of the Mahasiddhas, again, it tends to be kind of outrageous. Yeah? So there's one quote that Sobish provided on 617 there. Jigdan Sumgun, he said, well, first of all, one interesting quote, this is on page 618. Jigdan Sumgun very confidently told his students, he said, because I mastered this teaching, the teaching that he mastered is the understanding of the inseparability between emptiness and cause and effect. He says, because I mastered this teaching, I am among the mass of Dharma practitioners of Tibet, not only one head larger than they are, but I am distinguished by a full body length. So he very confidently said, I'm greater than all the practitioners in Tibet right now. Here, his point is not saying that he is greater, but by him truly understanding this point, that makes him greater. Not just one head. It's a common expression, like someone. It's often, I think, used in a negative way. Or even in English, we said, a head above everybody else, meaning like greater. Yeah. But I think in Tibetan, it's almost used in a way to criticize someone, to say, that guy thinks, he's a head above all of us, So here, Jigdan Sumgun, like, use this to kind of confidently state, because I understand this, I've mastered this key point, emptiness and cause and effect are two sides of the same coin. I'm not just one head above and beyond all the ones here in Tibet practicing the Dharma. I'm a full body length, greater than them. And then later in another context, he said, I, the one who possesses the realization matching the 80 Mahasiddhas of India, now appear as a renunciate. So he's like turning around, you know, like in the context of Mahasiddhas in India, right? To show kind of for the Mahasiddhas, to make the point, right? Because during the time of the Mahasiddhas, so this is contextual, right? During the time of the Mahasiddhas in ancient India, the established monasteries and seats of learning and seats of like great, supposed great Buddhist practice and great seats of learning have become so, I guess you could say, stuffy. Has become so mainstream, have become so normative that the Mahasiddhas manifested activity that shocked people is because of the context of needing to wake people up to, you guys are just going through the motions. Right? You guys are like studying in the seminaries, studying in the colleges, gathering so much knowledge, gathering so much information, knowing all your categories, so clear in your thinking, all of that, you know, so logical, your debate, you are, you know, winning in your use of debate against others. But as for realization, as for actually changing your mind, you're far from. So the Mahasiddhas acted in a way to challenge that kind of, you could say, dead religion, dead spirituality. Superficially looks like it's going really well. So Jigten Sungön is saying here, he says, my realization is equal to the Mahasiddhas. But now I appear, just as the Mahasiddhas appear with activities that are kind of shocking and outrageous. He's saying that now I will shock you guys by being a monk, a boring looking monk, so to say. He says, in this I am very reckless, he says. I'm so reckless, you know, that I'm a well-behaved monk. This statement is almost true, you know, to in a funny way or sad way. That when you have, right, you know, a context where people don't pay much attention to how they behave, impact of their behavior on others, and everyone trying to outdo each other on how beyond concepts they are, then the truly beyond concept is the one that is most careful about concepts. To truly transcend. He says, so in this I am very reckless. When I was teaching college still, teaching religious studies, I try to remind students in classes like Introduction to Buddhism. I try to remind students that we tend to think, you know, monasticism, the monastic life, monks and nuns, we tend to think of those as conservative or traditional, whatever word you want to use. They are traditional, they are conservative, right? That they're somehow, right? We think of them as part of like mainstream behavior and religion. But in fact, if you look more carefully, that lifestyle, it's truly radical. It's truly radical. If you want to be radical, how much more radical can you get by saying, the very basis and foundation in which society reproduces itself and perpetuates itself, we no longer participate in. How much more outrageous and radical do you want to get to say the biological means, the very basis of how society replicates and perpetuates itself? We make the choice to reject from the very foundations. The practice of celibacy is it's a radical move to say, I reject everything that you represent. The rejection of material as well is an extension of that, to saying, the very foundations of how you guys build this existence, I turn away from. So these are like the true, hippies, the true renunciates. It continues to be true today, as long as this is how human beings, this is how life, replicates itself and perpetuates itself. The true radical act of transcending that is to say, I don't participate in that anymore by choice. No. So that's, truly reckless, truly anti-normative, antinomian behavior. So monasticism, in that sense, is a threat to how mainstream society, a threat to how mainstream society, conventional society replicates itself, perpetuates itself, and does its thing. So the last few statements we've looked at, it's on this issue of when you realize emptiness. And so I also talked about, right? Remember I talked about how we should also understand that in the end, the real discussion there is not, whether someone like Buddha Shakyamuni, whether karma applies or doesn't apply. In the end, we're not really talking about when you arrive at the fruit, at the result, does it or does it not apply? Because we already say, and Gilbert Rinpoche always reminds us, at the state of Buddha, it's a state that you and I, using our concepts, can never reach. In that sense, we can never reach. Like our words, our concepts can never reach, can never touch that state. So to the degree that we're talking about the state of the result, why we're talking about it is because how we conceptualize this result now will have implications on how we now act and behave. So only to that degree is there a reason to talk about the result. So, and that we should always, if we don't remember that, which I feel sometimes people who have been so learned or indoctrinated by these lists, there's these amazing lists of Buddha's 18 special qualities, so like Gampopa gives them at the last chapter of Jewel Ornament of Liberation, chapter 21. I'm sure there are people, Kempos, who have memorize the list up and down, left and right, reciting it backwards, further dividing it into, subparts and all of that. I think if we look at that and we think, oh, I know what Buddha state is, then you're mistaken. To the degree that those 18 qualities are given, it's given because it has implications on how we practice now, how we behave now. So it's still about the path. But if you end up studying about descriptions about the result, and you end up thinking that, oh, now I know what the result is, then you are mistaken. And more so than just simply mistaken is that you are now kind of stuck. You have become indoctrinated, by what the result is. When we know, the result is something so amazing that, we cannot really know. So then you say, well, if we cannot really know, why are we striving for it? Now it takes us back to, I think, ground level, so-called foundational teachings. The key ground level is Buddha did not start by saying there is happiness. Buddha started by saying what? There is dukkha. It's not because Buddha was pessimistic, but it's because that's what we know. So Buddha says there is dukkha. We all can know what that is. Then, once we know what dukkha is, then Buddha doesn't even need to teach you. You will say, oh, well, I don't want that. I don't want dukkha. Then he says, oh yeah, then there is also the cessation of dukkha. Right? The third noble truth. There is the cessation of dukkha. And you're like, oh yes, I want that. Then he says, okay, well, then there's the way to arrive at that. The fourth noble truth. So on that ground level, he doesn't talk about, oh, the result is this, you'll have this, you'll have that. Because, we are then, speculating on things that we have no basis of really understanding. So where we can start is where we do know what it is. Maybe we're not clear about, what it is, but once it's clarified, we can see, oh yeah, oh my gosh, this is dukkha. This is suffering. I don't want it. So we go back to this ground level, this foundational. So Kyoba Rinpoche says, what other people consider to be not profound, we consider to be truly profound. I consider to be truly profound. He takes us back to that. Now, we're talking about fruit. We're talking about result. Yeah. So the last couple of statements is about how, in terms of conceptualizing the result, in terms of conceptualizing what happens when you have realized emptiness, you cannot think of it as separate from cause and effect. So that's one side of this coin. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, which is statements related to how, when we conceptualize, when we think about the result, the state of Buddha, not only do we think about emptiness, because primarily that's how Buddhahood is realized, when you completely and thoroughly achieve realization of the two selflessness, of the two emptinesses, emptiness of self, emptiness of phenomena. Yeah. So up till now, that side has been discussed in relation to, then what about cause and effect, right? So now what is being discussed is, what about Buddha qualities? Yeah? Again, it's that same issue, like does realizing emptiness mean Buddha qualities are also should also be empty as in non-existent? No. Again, this is about how you conceptualize the result. Yeah, again, don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, now, oh, yes, the result definitely is this way, this way, this way. So, 26, page 147, if you have that. The essence of the element, meaning Buddha nature, that is completely pure by nature, possesses the qualities of the result of separation. And there's some awkward expressions here. Awkward because we're unfamiliar with it, okay? The result of separation, meaning what is left when we have separated out, when we have removed the impurities. So when we have removed the afflictive emotions, when we have removed the kleshas, what is the result? The result are the qualities, the Buddha qualities. And so here it's saying, in other words, these Buddha qualities that are what remains after you remove the kleshas, these qualities are already present even at the level of unrefined, so to say, unrealized, unrefined Buddha nature. Even on the level of Buddha nature, these qualities that arises when the impurities have been purified are already there. Now, some of you might say, well, isn't that the case? Not really. As in, not everybody believed that. Not everybody taught that. So the statement that above tells us, many people think the essence of the Sugata, meaning Buddha nature, here called the element that is pure by nature, is taught as emptiness. So this is particularly true even today, very strict like Gelugpas. They will say that Buddha nature simply means that the potential to be awake is there. To speak of the Buddha qualities as already present there on this level is to overstate, things. For Gelugpas, especially, they will say, no. Buddha nature, the element, all those are just kind of metaphoric. It simply is a potential. It's not an actuality. It's a potential that you need to work with. But those qualities are not there. At least right now. And so then they have to explain in a way how it can become there when you are Buddha. So I'm not going to speak for them. You are interested in them, then you read more about how they talk about how they overcome this problem of it's not there on the ground. It's sequentially developed on the path. Then it's there in a certain way on the result. Ground, path, and result. Again, these are the three parts. Whereas Kagyupas, Nyingmapas, and here Jigden Sumgen will say, it's there on the ground, it's there on the path, it's there on the result. Yeah. Gelugpas and very strict Gelugpas and Sakyapas, it was like, no, it's there on the ground only in the sense that there is no absolute obstructor that is there that will prevent it from arising on the path, that will prevent it from existing in the result. Gelugpa Sakyapa will say that. It's not there on the ground. In some of the commentaries, they say, this idea that it is already there on the ground and that the problem is you don't recognize it, they said that's absurd. Because they say, if it is so precious, once you, why don't you recognize this? If it's so precious, you're going to recognize it. So they don't accept that. So they take, in a way, you could say, to be fair, you can say that they therefore take the effort to develop these qualities much more seriously in a way. Because they say it's not there. You have to actively cultivate. So you have to actively cultivate love, compassion, patience, generosity, which also, in a way, you can appreciate that point. Like, no, you have to cultivate that. If you just say, oh, it's there, I just have to discover, it's there, I just have to discover, then worse, you have not discovered, you still think, oh, it's there, it's there. Yeah, but here, Kyoba Rinpoche says, no, it's already there. So let's look at the commentary here. Element, that is, the term dhatu, refers to cause, expanse, element, and so forth. Moreover, this element, which primordially abides inseparable from all the qualities of separation and complete maturation, is obscured by adventitious faults. But these faults do not turn it into an affliction as such. So this here, is saying, no matter how much afflictive emotions are there, they do not cancel out the qualities that are there. In fact, between those qualities and the afflictions, the qualities are not adventitious. In other words, the qualities are not temporary and situationally existing, but they exist. It's like, I think an analogy would be something like, if this like fabric here, if you look, you can say, oh, this, these designs here, they are not stains. They're not stains. So don't try to wash them away. They already exist, on the ground. Now back here, these are stains. For example, I don't have any overt stains as an example here, but so these are stains, And so if they are stains, then you can attempt to wash them because you can remove that. So here too, if there was a stain here, then you're like, okay, let's wash the stain, get the stain out. But to say, oh, let's wash this cloud or this lotus, let's wash it. Let's wash it away so that it can be gone. No, you don't say that because it's part of. Then no matter, it says, no matter how much stains, right? The basic design isn't really affected. It's only affected from the viewer's point of view. And like, oh, this is stained. But the stains and the design, basic design of this fabric, they exist separately in the same space, but still separately. So kleshas, afflictive emotions, are like the stains. They occupy the same space, or superficially, they occupy the same space as this design. But they are separate. Yeah? So in the same way, here. But these faults do not turn it into an affliction as such. Does not turn the cause, the element, the qualities. This is taught through the detailed explanation of the example and meaning in the context of the fourth Vajra topic of the Uttara Tantra Shastra, as it is said. Since the body of the perfect Buddha is all-pervading, since true reality is undifferentiated, and since the gene exists in all beings, the gene, all beings always possess the Buddha embryo, or the Buddha nature, Buddha embryo. Now, concerning the differentiation of the veil through adventitious defilements, it is said, in agreement with the gradual sequence of impure, both impure and pure, and very pure, therefore you have sentient beings, bodhisattvas, and Buddhas. So, due to the presence and the degree of the presence of afflictive emotions, then we designate and say, these are sentient beings, these are bodhisattvas on the different levels of the path, and these are Buddhas. And for that, we can say, oh, at this stage, impure, both pure and impure, and thoroughly pure. Very pure, maybe not very, thoroughly pure, and completely. Because I don't think that, in terms of like when all the adventitious are removed, then thoroughly, completely pure. As it is said, the Buddha nature, which is summarized through these 6 topics, such as essence and so forth, is taught on the 3 occasions through 3 names. Yes, so this is the impure Buddha nature, both pure and impure Buddha nature, and completely pure, thoroughly pure. This element is free from arising, abiding, and cessation. As it is said, the nature of mind, like the element of space, is without causes and conditions, without a gathering of these 2, and without arising, cessation, and abiding. The essence is also not obscured by adventitious defilements, as it is said, the nature of mind, which is luminosity, is unchangeable like space, and is not afflicted through the adventitious defilements, such as desire, which arises from impure thoughts. If you ask how is adventitiously obscured, how is it adventitiously obscured, it is said, this element of the Sugata abides within beings, like a Buddha in a rotten lotus, honey in the bee, grain in the husk, gold in filth, a treasure in the earth, a tiny fruit in the sprout, a Buddha statue in rags, a ruler in the belly of a rotten woman, and jewels in the ground. So these are examples found in the Uttara Tantra text. So how do you abandon these defilements? Therefore, nirvana is not attained until Buddhahood is attained. And we cannot look at the sun having abandoned its light and rays. In this way, the embryo of a victor, of a Buddha, is expressed through 10 presentations. It's abiding amid affliction, and it is to be understood through the 9 examples. The examples are the examples above. So why can we not abandon the defilements now? It's because it's obscured. It needs to be, you need to gradually work through. And so that's the next point. Through these defilements, the fools, arhats, trainees, and the intelligent trainees are gradually obscured by 4, 1, 2, and 2 defilements. And these are different categories, right? If you ask, does adventitious mean that the nature was obscured from the beginning? The answer is no. While the shroud of the affliction of the element of beings is not primordially connected with the element itself, the undefiled nature of the mind is proclaimed to exist without beginning. I can say, basically, all these quotes, right, that he's giving is to make that point. And I can say, he's not giving necessarily reasoning. He's asserting. It is this way, it is this way, it is this way. This is how I feel. I'm honest that he's asserting. He's not engaging in logic. He's trying to use logic to convince you. So top of 152. Thus and so on has been taught in many ways by the great siddhas of this precious Kagyu. If I were to explain the meaning of all this, I would consider speaking incidentally about the system of maintaining the emptiness of self and other of the great Madhyamaka, and the manner of the many Siddhantas of the early elders here in the land of snow. However, since I am weary of writing, now through just this much meaning, it is already understood. There, basically, he's saying, oh, these topics are debated so much, he says, in Tibet. He says, well, I can talk about, Rang Tong, Shen Tong, emptiness of self, emptiness of other, and all the different siddhantas, and the different tenet system, the different philosophical systems. He says, I'm tired of writing this now. So I'm just quoting these passages from the Uttara Tantra mostly. Uttara Tantra is a key Mahamudra text that is not tantric in nature, it's sutric. Remember we talked about Gampopa's kind of style of teaching Mahamudra, which emphasizes sutric, whereas Sakyapas insists that Mahamudra is only available in the tantric, not available in the sutric. Gampopa, in contrast, says it exists in sutric, it exists in tantric, it also exists beyond sutric and tantric, what he calls essence Mahamudra. But here, Chodra is quoting mostly from the Uttara Tantra, and then some from Tathagata Garbha, Srimala Devi, Avatamsaka, then a couple of quotes from the Mahasiddhas. So I would say that his commentary here is really, written more for Kagyupas, and say, hey, you Kagyupas, focus on what, the lineage masters have already pointed out. So here really, on one hand, you could say he's being lazy because he doesn't want to logically argue his point, right? But on the other hand, remember this, we said that essentially Gongchik and commentaries on Gongchik are not interested in disputing, despite its seeming form of making arguments, right? Oh, we say this, other people say that. Oh, other people say that, we say this, right? It superficially resembles a dialectical, a debate mode. And in fact, one of the great Kagyupa scholars, the 8th Karmapa, Mikyo Dorje, he used the Gongchik to do that, to debate the Gelugpas, to debate the Sakyapas. He did that. And Sobish, maybe not in this book, in more private correspondence, he said, Karmapa, the 8th Karmapa, was using Gongchik in a way that probably Jigten Sumgun and the early commentaries will disagree. They will say, no, you are using this to, enter debates and disputations with the others. Whereas we are using this to change mind. Now remember, Chodra comes a few hundred years later. Chodra is also post 8th Karmapa. So Chodra has to do some debating, has to do some defending of the turf, meaning the integrity of the Gongchik system. So here and there, he would respond to Sakya Pandita, especially. Here and there, he will do that. But if you look at Dorshema and Rinjangma in the early commentaries, you'll see that they have no interest in like trying to convince someone else to accept what Kyopa Rinpoche taught. Instead, they were writing for people who were already inspired by Kyopa Rinpoche, by Jigten Sumgön. But they're writing commentaries to clarify and to show how, if you really follow these teachings, it will change you. Not it will make you a better debater, not it will make you a more famous scholar, but that it will change you. It will meaningfully change you. So 8th Karmapa, actually, he says, Gongchik is the main Kagyupa tenet system. And that's why Sobish says, if Jigten Sumgön was around, he would say, no. Please don't turn this into a tenet system. Please don't turn this into a philosophical system. Because one of my big points is, don't make it into a tenet system. But the 8th Karmapa, I mean, out of admiration, the 8th Karmapa isn't like trying to, subvert, or pervert, Kyopa Rinpoche's teachings, but really out of admiration, he says, this is like the crown jewel. He says, the Gongchik is like the crown jewel of Kagyupas in terms of it being the most representative tenet system of the Kagyupas. So recently, the Karmapa, in his birthday greetings to Our Holiness, he mentions, he says, we don't study the Gongchik in Kamakagyu, but he says, but the 8th Karmapa says, the Gongchik is the crown jewel of all Kagyupas. And he said, I hope in the near future, we can begin to study Gongchik in Karmakagyu. Now, of course, they're going to study it according to 8th Karmapa's commentary. And 8th Karmapa wrote many long and short commentaries on Gongchik. 8th Karmapa spent 2 years in Drigong as a great teacher, not as a student. But it's also probably there that he then got very inspired to study the Gongchik himself. And as he was studying, he gave teachings to the assembly in Dragong. At that time, it is said that Dragong was kind of weak and no clear leadership. So the Karmapa came to try to help stabilize the place, the 8th Karmapa, to help stabilize the place. So he set up camp. The Karmapas were famous for being nomadic. The early Karmapas would travel with a big group of disciples and go from area to area. It's almost like a what we call in the South, like Bible revivals, and they travel, with a big tent, going from place to place. So he stopped in Dragong for, I think, 2 years. So the current Karmapa, the main one, there's a couple of Karmapas. The main Karmapa, he said, Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, the 8th Karmapa, says, that Gongchik is the crown jewel of Kagyupas, the crown jewel tenant. He says so. He hopes that Kamakagyu will start studying Gongchik. Sobish's notes, once again, very helpful if you want to read through that yourself. And now we look at statement 27. The 37 factors of awakening exist in the embryo of the Tathagata. This is really an expansion of statement 26. Now you have to, again, try to not forget, right? Kyopa Rinpoche did not put these statements together. Kyopa Rinpoche did not set about going, I'm going to write 150 statements, and then I'm going to arrange them into 7 chapters, and then I want people to study this. No, he did not do that. These were his successor, Sherab Jungne, writing down what he remembered to be key points given by Kyopa Rinpoche over Kyopa Rinpoche's life as a teacher. So we should not take these statements. I'm sure Sherab Jungne was very careful in arranging the statements into the chapters. And in fact, the auxiliary chapter, chapter 18, right, has 46 statements. So altogether, 150 plus 46, close to 200, was probably the number of statements that Sherab Jungne kind of wrote down and say, my uncle said this. Then after that, when he arranged them into 7 chapters, these 40 statements that is in the auxiliary chapter was, in his opinion, maybe repetitive. Yeah, so then he didn't put them into the 7 chapters. But he didn't want to throw them away, right? So he put them as an appendix. Like, these are also auxiliary statements. So one way of reading this again also is like, because this was never written, right? Kyopa Rinpoche did not compose this as a sustained argument. So one way of reading this is the way that some people read the Bible, It's just at any given day, just turn to one page and look at the statement on that page and ask yourself, how can this statement change the way I have been taught about the Dharma? Change, maybe not change. Maybe the way you've been taught the Dharma, it's like, oh, yeah, it matches what this statement is saying. But I can say, frequently it doesn't match, even for myself. When I look at the statement, I go, oh, I need to think about this. Yeah? And more so, when did I teach or say something that this statement would say, you were being sloppy there when you said you said it in that way, because this statement clearly points out that there's some problem with the way that was taught, that was expressed, that was said. Yeah, the way to relate to these statements is really important, and that we don't get carried away even as we're going from statement 26, statement 27. Yeah, there's some, connection. Therefore, Sherab Jung put them there. But remember that the original utterance of these statements, they were scattered throughout Kyoba Rinpoche's life. So now, through your efforts, through having found some translators who can, work with us, we have these teachings of Kyoba Rinpoche. Yeah, a handful now, 2 handfuls. I mean, if all 300 were translated, then you're going to find a lot of these statements, right? Not exactly in the form that we have them here, but the ideas expressed by these statements, you're going to find scattered throughout all these over 12 volumes of his collected works. Out of the 12 volumes, 1 volume, I think, is the Teaching to the Assemblies, which is what we are translating from, Teaching to the Assemblies. And the Teachings to the Assemblies, there were over 300 titles. So here are the 37 factors of awakening. Yeah. Just to make clear, this is different from the 37 bodhisattva practices. Yeah. The 37 bodhisattva practices is a Lojong text composed in Tibet. The 37 factors of awakening it's a summary of so for example, it includes the 4 foundations of mindfulness is part of the 37 factors of awakening. The 7 factors of awakening is also in there. So if you can look up this easily, the list of the 37 factors of awakening. So statement 27 is an expansion, really, of statement 26. So 158, Sobish tells us, the sutra system generally lists the 37 factors as the 4 applications of mindfulness, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 genuine restraints, the 4 bases of miraculous powers, the 5 faculties, 5 strength, 7 elements of awakening, and the Eightfold Path of the Noble Ones. So the Noble Eightfold Path is included in there. So then, for example, in the Vajrayogini mandala, in the Vajrayogini practice, the 37 deities that is in the mandala of Vajrayogini or Vajravarahi are matched with the 37 factors. Choki Drakpa, in some other writing, he says, the movement of the 5 root winds in the left and right channels, which is the basis for the arising the 4 joys, the classification of the 6 consciousnesses by the 4 joys makes 24 factors. Furthermore, through engagement, abiding, and arising paired with the 4 joys in connection with the 4 chakras, there are 12, totaling 36. The final 37 factor is mentioned as satiating of all branch channels. So here is an example of matching the 37 factors into a different context, the context of manipulating the inner energy channels and pathways. So there's the 37 factors in the context of deity practice. There's the 37 factors in the context of yogic energy manipulation training. There's the 37 factors in the context of sutra yana teachings. So all of these is various levels of the same reality. various levels, various contexts of the same reality. So like on the level of Sutrayana training, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, they match the 4 dakinis of the mandala of Vajra Yogini, the 4 principal dakinis, which matches the 4 chakras within the energy training context. So they all have their correspondences. This is Sobish pointing out more deeply than Chodra's commentary on 27, statement 27. Now, the key thing, why I would say, why this emphasis that, the qualities are already there, and that when you become Buddha, nothing has been added. If anything, it's just something has been removed. Confusion has been removed, right? So one quote on page 157 for the Vajrapanjara Tantra, which is a Hevajra Tantra related Hevajra. Apart from the jewel mind, there is neither Buddha nor sentient being. Apart from the basic consciousness and the other consciousnesses, there is nothing whatsoever. This quote is showing how, the mind already has all these qualities. "28. The 4 immeasurables are the essence of the Buddha embryo and Buddhahood. 4 immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. The 4 immeasurables. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness, right? Here it says, they are the essence of Buddha nature, Buddha embryo. Again, for us, maybe we're like, oh yeah, of course, why not? But again, I think it's because many of you are mostly exposed to Kagyu Nyingma style up to this point. But there's a lot of discussion that says, oh, no. These 4 immeasurables, they are like, they are very high levels of mind, but they are still within samsara. To go beyond samsara, you have to transcend even love, compassion, equanimity, and joy. In fact, in another context, in the Sutrayana context, the 4 immeasurables are called the 4 divine dwellings, Brahma Vihara. So it's said to be in the highest of the Brahma realms within samsara, in the highest of the divine realms. You reach there by practicing these 4 states of mind: loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. So on that basis, there are traditions that says these are not Buddha qualities. These are very noble qualities to have within samsara. But here, Gilbert, see, so the statement, people claim that the 4 immeasurables are merely a worldly samadhi. They are merely a worldly state. a good worldly state, but nonetheless worldly, bound to the world. So in this sense, it is true, I would say. If you read, in this case, more so, if you read like, or listen to teachings of certain like more conservative Theravada teachers, not so much the Western Theravada teachers, because Western Theravada teachers, you know, Jack Kornfield, people like that, they have been influenced, I would say, by Mahayana and Vajrayana. But the more traditional Theravada teachers will say, oh yes, the four Brahma Viharas, they're just very good like states of mind to have while you're in samsara. But when you are Buddha or when you are Arhat, these are all irrelevant. These are irrelevant. In fact, in a certain Burmese tradition, it's called the Mahasi tradition of meditation, very popular among Western Theravada. The like key teachers of the Mahasi tradition in Burma, they are even known to say, don't practice metta. They say that will get you more entangled in the world. Don't practice loving kindness because that will get you more stuck. You need to transcend. So they say you practice only vipassana. That insight will free you. Then you are scot-free, you're home free. You won't get tied up. But of course, Western teachers of Theravada, they don't talk like this for the most part. Then here, obviously, if Jigten Sumgön has to address this, that means there were Tibetans who also asserted this, that the four immeasurables are merely a worldly samadhi. But so much of the teachings of Pamodrupa, Jigten Sumgön on bodhicitta basically says, you know, no, these are the very essence of what the Buddha state is. Sobish has a good discussion. He gives you the context. He says, you know, yeah, so Sobish, you know, he gives this context of the Brahmic abodes. So although they are not exclusively Buddhist, Jigten Sumgön does not hesitate to teach them as existing on the levels of ground, path, and result. Yeah, and this has to do, I would say, with later Buddhists, you know, not just, not so much at the time of the Buddha. Later Buddhists, I think, in their efforts to try to distinguish clearly between what is exclusively Buddhist and what is common to other traditions, that they want so much to kind of emphasize the like uniqueness and superiority of Buddha's teachings, so that then those teachings and qualities that are shared with others, they will say, those are good, those are helpful, but those are things you need to transcend. Whereas if you read the early sources themselves, you probably won't find things stated so bluntly. So you will hear like among like, I have said it myself, you know, 10, 15 years ago, like, oh, you know, don't meditate on love so much because they will not free you. Yeah? Which in a certain context, it is true. But nonetheless, love and compassion, they are on the essence level part of what bodhicitta is. Yeah. Questions or comments? Questions or comments, impressions?
Well, this, I mean, you just sort of said it at the end. I'm aware that everyone does not have bodhicitta as a goal or a desire.
That's the main focus, right?
As a focus.
Mm-hmm.
But if the whole point is to be able to free all beings, how can you not assume that these are part of?
They see this as a means to an end. So you need, so let's forget about Theravada that does not explicitly center stage freeing all beings, right?
Okay.
I mean, that's an accurate statement. First of all, Theravada doesn't equate Hinayana, right? Hinayana, I already said so many times, has its own context within Tibetan. Let's talk about Theravada, for example, because these are forms of Buddhism we are exposed to. Theravada does not center stage bodhicitta. So for them, you can say, okay, fair enough. You don't want to talk about this. We'll leave alone. So I think your question is more like, hey, what about if you're in the Tibetan tradition, right? You talk about freeing all beings. How can you not, right?
Right.
Yeah. This is how they will say, no. We're not saying that love, compassion are not important. Yeah. They have the same statements that we recite. Love, compassion is the basis for bodhicitta, right? But the way they will say that is they say they are important to develop in order to free you and free all beings. But when you're freed and all beings are freed, love and compassion are like the boat, that you row to get across to the other side. When you're at the other side, you don't need these oars anymore. Yeah, you can see how it logically follows, right? Even from those teachings that says the Dharma is just a raft to get to the other side. They take it very literally. Once you're on the other side, why carry that raft around? That raft is irrelevant to you now.
It seems to me that this whole argument that they're making is irrelevant. I mean, to us. I mean, I guess if you want to get into an intellectual discussion of, but I mean, what difference does it really make until we're there?
Yeah, and so then you could even, or maybe you don't want to, but I would even say, ask Kyopa Rinpoche, so why are you even pointing this out, right? Why? Is because the nuance is really important.
I'm not sure how.
If you see it as instrumental, which is the other view, you relate to these qualities in a very, I would say, not very, but in a instrumental way. If you see it as fundamental, you relate to it in a fundamental way. Does that make sense? That's the nuance.
Not really. I mean, because I guess since I've been influenced by Tibetan Buddhism, I mean, it just seems that it's something that I accept.
Not just Tibetan Buddhism. Here, I would say influenced by Kagyu,
okay,
by Kyopa Rinpoche's, Okay.
But it just seems to me that that's the way it is, and I can accept that intellectually.
Accept what?
That it is fundamental to our nature.
Yes. as opposed to, there are Tibetan traditions that will say this is instrumental, not fundamental.
I kind of see that, but I'm not sure from my point of view it makes any difference.
Whether it's instrumental or fundamental?
Because I'm seeing it as fundamental. I don't get the nuance of instrumental, but it doesn't matter. I don't
Instrumental means, no, it matters. That's why Kyoba Rinpoche is stating it. It matters. Instrumental means you are going to relate it to as a means to an end.
Okay. I'm not thinking I'm doing that. I'm
not saying you're doing that, because you're not. You're already sold on the fundamental side. I'm saying the people who look at it as instrumental, right? They're going to see this as something to be left behind at some point.
Okay.
They see, no. Continue first. Do you know what I'm pointing out here? I'm pointing out that, what am I, so repeat what I said, Judy.
They see it as a means to an end.
Yes. And do you see, so now following that, right? Do you see how the way you see it and the way they see it is different? And the difference is important. That's key. I'm not talking about you.
I think I do see it, but from the standpoint of practice.
Yes.
And
there are implications, and that's why Kyoba Rinpoche is making this statement.
But I don't see how I would practice differently, because what I perceive or don't perceive if I were Buddha it's all I don't understand and I don't know. So I guess I'm not understanding what how one would practice differently, because thinking that it is or it isn't relevant at some point in time when we're Buddha, we've still got to get there. And so how does it make that much difference, practically speaking, when you're sitting down practicing or going through your day trying to practice?
So now at least we're clear what you're not clear about. You're not clear about why Kyoba Rinpoche is making this statement.
Correct.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I can...
Yes, you're not clear about why he's making this statement.
If you're in an intellectual debate, perhaps, but...
And then we're saying he is not interested in intellectual debate.
Right. So why is he
saying? So you're not seeing why. Yeah. So that is what I want to clarify.
Okay.
We're not talking about, I don't understand the other people's view. We're talking about, I don't understand why Kyoba Rinpoche needs to make this statement.
To us.
Yes. Or to whoever he's making this statement to.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So good. At least we're clear about what we're confused about. So now other people can try to say, well, I see why he is making this statement. Maybe. Or maybe you'll all say, well, I also don't see why he needs to make this statement.
Guru.
Yeah.
Well, when I was practicing the Burmese tradition.
Good. Yes. So now there is some context. Don't walk away, Judy. Important to listen.
and in some cases, some Thai tradition as well.
I had to take care of something. Sorry.
Yes.
These 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 abodes, as you say, some teachers actually emphasize that we only practice a little bit of it to smoothen our practice, but eventually when we reach a certain stage, if I remember correctly, it's the third stage, the non-returner, we are supposed to drop all of this.
Yes.
In fact, the practice, because the way for Theravada, the way they put it is metta, karuna, or loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and finally, equanimity. So the last practice of equanimity is to help us to drop the first three.
Yes.
So that we don't get too attached to the first three.
Yes.
Because in the Theravada view,
so your example that you're taking is from your Theravada context, but I can confirm that in the Tibetan context, they do say that too. It's just, you don't find it in Lama Surya Das's book. Yeah.
Right.
Because it's a popular version. But if you go study, like Lamrim,
right.
At some point they make the same statement.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Because to them, they say that if you practice too much metta, then a lot of people will like you and you get distracted. You don't get your practice. So that's why they say a lot of monks need to go to the forest.
Yes.
Where the metta is only affecting the animals, but not the people, so that they don't get distracted.
Yes. And these are very serious practitioners, you know. It might sound like a joke to us, but no, these are very serious practitioners. And they have that idea, and that, in Kyoba Rinpoche's opinion, is coloring the way they develop love and compassion. They see it as things that ultimately needs to be abandoned.
And then luckily, eventually, again, I was exposed to some other Burmese tradition and some Thai tradition that emphasize the four aborts as fundamental.
Right.
So the way they question it is like, how can you say that the Buddha don't have metta or compassion or equanimity? And if you say that way, then are you implying that in the Theravada system, even arahants, they don't have compassion, they don't go out to help people?
Right.
So they use that to counter the argument of needing to drop all these four aborts.
Yes.
And I can actually see why Kyopa make this statement, because our practice of, or I would say our intention of practicing bodhicitta, these four aborts is very fundamental to establish this bodhicitta, or else it'll just be like, oh, I'm just saying this, but I don't really see why I should be practicing it.
Or like, I'm just temporarily cultivating this because at some point I'm going to get rid of it.
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
If I could go back to the subject of space and emptiness.
Wait, does it relate to this question?
No.
Oh, then not yet.
Wait. Okay. Well, it does, but in a long way at the end. But it's okay.
No, then not
wait.
yet.
I wait. Okay.
One kind of connection that I was drawing between these, that I don't really have anything concrete to say about, but I think that's kind of the point, is how there's maybe a dynamic that you kind of tap into when you practice thinking that it's something fundamental, a dynamic similar to when you practice like idam practice, and that I mean, I can't.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When we get to Secret Mantra chapter, Kyoba Rinpoche says, other people think, right, idam is just a contrived way to get you to realize that you are Buddha. He says, here we understand the idam to be fundamentally who you are. See, again, one is fundamental and one is instrumental. The bigger picture, right? And I'm very aware of this, you know. I'm very aware of this. You all have heard me say that, but it's connected to this issue. You have heard me said, please don't relate to the Buddha Dharma like it is a set of truths with capital T, that you should relate to it as a set of tools, right? You've heard the way I talk about this, right? But I can tell you now, each time I say it that way, at the back of my mind, I have a footnote that says to myself, be careful how you push this, because if you're not careful with that, you're going to have a bunch of people walking around relating to the Dharma as simply a set of tools. As much as it is important not to relate to the Dharma as capital T truth, and that is maybe my background of growing up in a Buddhist society where people do that, then that's like idolatry, you know, worshiping a false truth, a false God, like, oh, all we have to do is, oh, this is true, this is true, this is true, but never applying it. Using the language of tools is to emphasize the need to engage and to apply. But using the language of tools can also communicate, right, that these are only tools. How do you relate to your tools? How do you relate to tools? Let's not talk about Dharma. Tools in your house.
They're not a fundamental part of ourselves.
Yeah. They are just like a means to an end.
Means to an end.
Right. Unless you're Japanese, you know. Then a tool is not just a tool. A tool has a spirit. That's closer to when we say it's fundamental, right? I mean, like Japanese, like artisans, right? Oh, it's not a means to an end. It's the end itself. It's the means. Now that is more similar to.
Because it's both.
Yeah, it's both. Yes.
Well, one thing there too is if you have like even that differentiation, like the spirit of the tool versus just having a tool. Just have a tool and are using it as an instrument, and the implication in your mind is that that is to serve a purpose.
Yes.
And therefore, if something comes along that seems to do that better, then you're going to switch.
Yes.
And so you're always looking for
a different yidam.
Yeah, implied.
Different method.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than that is itself, right? Deeply, fundamentally who you are, and you have not yet discovered, right? Yeah, so in a way, it's like, I will say Kyopa Rinpoche will also agree, it's both. Yeah, there are times where you have to relate to it as a tool so that it will do what it's supposed to do, and not like a god. Like, so on the other hand, if you hang up all your tools, you know, and all you do is you pray to it, right? And you sit and you go, oh, wow, beautiful, beautiful, right? Then you have a museum of tools and you don't have a workshop.
So you use the tools, i.e. the yidam, visualization.
Or lojong or whatever, right?
Or whatever it is, with the understanding on another level that this is who we are.
This is part of your nature, yes.
This.
Yeah. So the small t truth and the capital T truth, same thing.
I think I'm unconfused now.
Good. Not just you, but I think many of us were not able to put the finger on, right? What are we confused about? And I think we don't appreciate this statement if we don't see how there is a difference between how you relate to the four immeasurables as an instrumental or as fundamental.
Fundamental.
Yeah. Here he wants to say it's fundamental.
Fundamental.
And therefore, when you relate it to as fundamental, then you use it as instrumental, then you have the whole thing. So for example, I'll turn this into the Zen tradition, the Zen context, right? The conventional Zen context is you meditate in order to be Buddha. And that would apply to other traditions too. That's how we think about it. And Tibetan Buddhists will agree. Oh yes, you meditate in order to become Buddha. Yeah. It sounds reasonable enough, right? But that's actually a fairly instrumental view of meditation, right? Now, Dogen, more than anybody else in the context of Zen, he is going to discover a way of articulating this as, no, no, no. You do not meditate to become Buddha. So there are some stories pre-Dogen in China. Dogen was Japanese, 13th century. And Dogen would tell the story of Ma Zhu, one of the early masters, Ma Zhu Daoyi. Either he did this to his student or his teacher did it to him. Was basically the disciple is meditating. And then the teacher said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm meditating." And it's like, "What are you meditating for?" For? To become Buddha. The student responded. Then the master said, "Oh, okay." Then, typical Zen story. Master does something strange. He picks up a towel, a loose towel from the ground. Then he sat down before this, next to the student who is meditating, and he takes a cloth out and he polishes the towel. And the student said, "Master, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm polishing a towel." He said, "What for?" He said, "To make it into a mirror." The student said, "No amount of polishing a towel is going to make it a mirror." And teacher said, "No amount of meditating is going to make you a Buddha." The point there is that way of relating to your practice, you will not become a Buddha. So Dogen resolved it by articulating it as to sit, meaning to meditate, is not to become Buddha, but is to be Buddha. Like the Buddha state is the meditative mind. So every moment of you sitting, every moment of you meditating, you are not achieving, you're not getting closer to Buddha, but you are manifesting the Buddha that you are. So he says, meditation is the activity of Buddhas, rather than an instrument to become Buddha. So don't relate to your practice, your spiritual discipline, as a means to an end, but as the very way you manifest, the very way that you express, manifest, actualize who you are. So this is how, so in Soto Zen, they say, to sit is to be Buddha, not to become Buddha, but to be Buddha. Yeah. And again, like all this about meditation, right? Meditation as a means to an end is across all Buddhist traditions, whether Theravada, whether Buddhist, whether Mahayana, whether Chinese, Japanese, whatever. But there's an inherent kind of problem that needs to be addressed. Yeah, this instrumental view, right? And if we take the instrumental view, which has its place and which has its appeal, then you will also hear statements. You'll come across statements that says, once you are Buddha, you are beyond meditation, beyond practice. It's true. Like the 4 Mahamudra levels, the 4 yogas of Mahamudra, the last one is called beyond meditation, right? Then if you take that literally, you will say, oh, meditation is a means to an end. Buddhists don't meditate anymore. But then, this is the way that in Abhidharma studies, whether Theravada Abhidharma or Mahayana Abhidharma or Tibetan Abhidharma, when they're studying like abstracted theory, then they will say, oh, yes, Buddhists don't meditate because Buddhists are beyond meditate, right? But then if you look at narratives, Buddha Shakyamuni, on a daily basis, he has his breakfast, then he goes meditate. Then in Mahayana Sutras, Buddha enters a samadhi. Like the Heart Sutra enters a samadhi and comes out of samadhi. And you're like, wait, they're meditating. Why does he need to meditate? I thought he's already Buddha. Because it's part of a Buddha's nature. So I mentioned a few weeks ago, maybe a few classes back, this Buddhist studies professor, he passed away, Stephen Collins, who taught at Chicago. He differentiates, he says, between I'm afraid I forgot his vocabulary, but yeah, basically systematic thought and like narrative thought as the two modes that you will find in Buddhist texts or in any religious text. The narrative is closer to the immediacy of lived experience. And narrative thought is messy. Necessarily, human beings. But when a tradition grows from, a following into a religion, the doctors of the faith, whether you call them Khenpos, whether you call them theologians, whether you call them geshes, whether you call them pandita, their business is to develop systematic thought, laying it all out, right? But Stephen Collins said, when we confuse these two modes, and when we ask systematic thought, questions that are fundamentally belonging to narrative, or when you ask this one and you want to try to get these two to debate, then you're completely wasting your time. But to be able to see, and I would say in this context, Kagyupa's more narrative. But because of Gampopa and his Kadampa training, systematic thought also was an important element. So the point that Sobish gave, he said, in the early commentaries, the two earliest commentaries of Gongchik, Rinjangma and Dorshema, lots and lots of stories are given because that's using narrative, using narratives to kind of illustrate points. Then later Kagyupas, of course, like 8th Karmapa, he learned, Pema Karpo and Choki Drakpa himself, they learn, more kind of. But I would say in the early days, it's much more. Like Milarepa doesn't have a, step by step. Look at the songs of Milarepa, he just gives whatever the person in front of him needs. Yes, Larry, we're ready.
It is related.
Good.
Okay.
Now you can
Space.
tie it all up.
Yeah, space and emptiness. The view we're looking at is that these things are fundamental to our nature, the four immeasurables.
Mm-hmm.
We want to strip away all the afflictions. And when we do that, and we become manifestations in space showing these qualities,
Mm-hmm.
we are Buddhas in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
But we are still empty.
Mm-hmm.
We are occurring in space. We appear, we disappear, but we're sort of pulling these, we're becoming a manifestation of these immeasurables here and now. That's what we're striving to do.
Yes.
That was what I wanted to understand.
Yes. And it's possible because of emptiness. So it's linked up to the earlier statements. Earlier statements is more general about how cause and effect is not rendered impossible or irrelevant. Here more specifically, the qualities that we use to develop, to free us, are not just tools, but they're also
part of the fundamental nature.
Yeah, they are also part of the fundamental nature.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful difference.
Yeah.
When we get that nuance, then it's very different. Then even if I sit down and I say, I am Yidam, this and all of that, days you're like, and when you go, you're like, this is a tool. No, I'll go find some other tool.
Right.
But if it's like, this is, my nature, then of course you're not going to necessarily go, oh yeah, I'm inspired now. But it will get you to kind of say, wait, what does it mean, Like this is, this is my nature. Another statement we will see in Gongchik I think it's in the secret mantra level. It says, the generation stage is the generation stage is, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it's something along the lines of how other people other people will say that what you want to do is to be rid of mental proliferation, right? Mentation. Here it'll say that the generation stage works on the principle of mentation, and then that mentation is part of the fundamental nature. Again, ordinarily we say mentation is what people translate as mental proliferation or conceptual thoughts. Here he'll say, actually the generation stage, it's not just, again, it's not like a tool artificially designed, but rather it's designed based on understanding the fundamental nature and how that works.
That's how we can say that everything is Buddha. That's how we can say that all phenomena are Buddha? All sounds are Buddha?
Because of why?
Because of seeing the fundamental nature in everything we think and do?
Yeah, I guess. But all sounds are mantra, all forms are Buddha, all thoughts are wisdom. It's a slightly different context, yeah?
Cause and effect.
Mhm.
Space and emptiness are cause and effect.
Say that. How are you linking to?
Well, in the text, it says emptiness is both cause and effect.
Yes.
Okay. Also, our actions are cause for karma.
Yes.
Okay. When karma ripens, it becomes manifest in the world we can see. In the same
Yes.
way, is that the effect?
Yes.
That's the result.
That's the effect. Yes.
Of the karma, which is sort of created, floating around. We can't see it manifest any place. It has no
but
shape.
we can see the cause, right? When at the cause level, we can see the
We
cause.
could try to identify the cause.
Yes.
We could say this created that karma,
Yes.
possibly, if that's what we see.
But the cause at the point of the cause is quite obvious. It's a cause.
Yes, and then the ripening of it is going to occur in space,
Yes.
just the way we are appearing in space. It's sort
Yes.
of like it's floating around. Boom! It is now visible.
Yes.
Okay.
So just so you guys know, I've been thinking that we need to have an upcoming exam. So you all need to write some essays. That's the only way. Yeah. Otherwise, I have no idea, you know. I have no idea. Yeah, so get ready. That could be the license to continuing or not continuing. Yeah, it'll give you a reference point, yeah, if you have been wasting your time. You need to have some clarity about what we've been looking at, you know. Otherwise, it'll just be fuzzy, 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 fuzzy. You can write in English. You can write in Spanish. You can write and then, you know, record it. You know. Yeah, there are many ways of having this exam, but it's good. Otherwise, you know, yeah, just, you know, YouTube has a lot of stuff you can just go listen. Changchu Semchu Rinpoche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyur Ge Ba Nyam Pa Me Ba Yang Go Ne Gong Du Bel War Shu.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Ciao.